Yeah, libraries are magical. They really
No,
are.
they are.
And
They're truly wonderful. Hey folks, welcome to Lights Out Mass, a podcast about government transparency in Massachusetts, or the lack thereof. I'm Andrew Quemere, here with my co-host, Jeff Raymond.
my character in Baldur's Gate is always over encumbered because he's carrying every book that he collects in every area. I do this in every game that I play.
Jeff, you gotta stop taunting me with the Baldur's Gate stuff.
I did it in Skyrim too. Some people like Wheels of Cheese.
Not only am I jealous, but the bit's gonna get old soon,
I know.
So we've got to come up with something new. But anyway, we are recording on Monday, October 2nd, 2023.
Happy Banned Books Weeks to all who celebrate.
Yeah, and so Jeff deliberately picked Banned Books Week to do an episode about banned books. It's not just a coincidence, right, Jeff?
It was absolutely planned. Yes, we definitely planned this months in advance.
Yes. We are doing an episode about sort of book bans and book challenges, you know, with libraries and public schools. Maybe you've heard a little bit about that. It's kind of been a bigger issue recently than it normally is. And Jeff, I think you're going to kind of give us a little bit of an intro on that. You've got a project going.
This is a issue that's very near and dear to me. I was a former children's librarian myself. I was a library trustee, I should say, in my hometown for a number of years. I currently help run the Friends of the Library in Newbury. So this is just like a thing for me. And beyond that, it's a freedom of information thing. And if this podcast is about anything, it's about freedom of information. And people who try to ban books are trying to keep information from people who could otherwise use it. With this latest spate of book banning across the country, Massachusetts isn't getting hit the way, say, Texas or Florida is. But, you know, we're still seeing a lot of book bans. We had some people try to steal some books from the library in Millbury. I'll talk about that later on. But you hear this across the state of different libraries. Unfortunately, all the information is a little inconsistent. Most of it is self-reporting. They either do it through their state aid reporting tool, or some of the statewide organizations are kind of collecting it in an ad hoc nature. So I got frustrated with the reporting on it. And when I get frustrated, I start making public records requests. And I'll get more into it later, but I've already issued around 450 records requests to the schools and libraries of the state to find out exactly how the book bans are going.
That's what we all do. When we get frustrated with something, we just go out and file like 400, 500 public records requests. It's just...
Absolutely.
Just how all people are wired, Jeff. It's not something weird about you. So... yeah, I mean, as you were saying, this is a freedom of information issue, which is, you know, why it's not sort of the normal thing we talk about, but it's relevant to this podcast because, as you said, Jeff, books are information, you know, and I think there is some people who sort of downplay this and say, well, if something I think is inappropriate, it shouldn't be in the library, and that's not really a big deal because if you want it, just go buy the book yourself. But that's really not a very reasonable response because not everybody has infinite money and can just go out and buy every book they want. And, you know, it's also just, it's like the principle of the thing. Libraries exist for information, for entertainment, and we shouldn't let someone just dictate what the content of that is. You know, we have librarians who are thoughtful people who spend, you know, years actually training to be librarians, and they put a lot of thought into these collections, and they're, you know, not like nefarious people as some of these people are trying to present them as. They're trying to, you know, do the most popular books. They're trying to also have, you know, books that maybe aren't as popular, but that, you know, they deserve an audience because of the importance of their content. And I'm not going to second guess librarians. Like, I go to libraries all the time, and I got to tell you, they are amazing. Librarians are amazing. Libraries are amazing. You know, I've been doing a lot of research lately on some decades old stuff. This is like my big secret project that I'm not going to get into the details of it, but what I'll say is I've been looking at microfilm. Remember that? Anybody look at microfilm when they were in college or something? And just I gotta say, what an invaluable service to these librarians who create these archives that people use. I found in one library, Jeff, you're not going to believe this, a card index of the newspaper articles that are on microfilm. So, the just amazing that some librarian was looking through the paper every day, typing up the headlines, organizing them by subject, so that some guy, 30, 40 years later, who shows up to the library to do research doesn't have to just stumble around blind, looking at every single paper in the microfilm archive. I can actually look at these cards and try to like pinpoint some dates and stuff.
Did you sneeze when you opened the thing and the dust came pouring out like in a cartoon?
Yeah, the reference librarian that showed me this room where this catalog was located didn't even know it was there. Like, and it was like, oh, look at that. And he was like, whoa, I haven't seen that before. But
libraries are magical. They really are.
They are. And they're truly wonderful.
And it's worth noting, too, for all the wailing and gnashing of teeth about police budgets and everything else, libraries are never funded to the level of which they provide a value in service to the cities and towns they're in.
Yeah.
They are always the first ones on the chopping block. They're always seen as the nice to have options. And it's absolutely tragic because especially in cities, especially in places with, more disadvantaged populations, that is the place they go to do their life. We're able to talk on a podcast over the internet once a week. Some people, like, they can go to the library for half hour a day, and that's the time they get. And what do libraries get? They get a bit of state aid, and they're usually the first people to not get their full budget request in your towns and cities. And they still somehow make it happen.
It really speaks to the people who run these libraries, who work in them, just how amazing they are, that they can provide just such an incredible, important service that benefits so many people on such a tiny budget.
Yeah, and we saw, especially in the last 15 years or so, it used to be that every school would have a librarian. And in the last 15, 20 years, probably when we had the slight dip in the economy in the turn of the 99-2000 year, but especially after the 2008 crash, a lot of those positions were just eliminated and not refilled. And the places that did refill them came up with a brand new position called a media specialist. So now they don't have to pay for the person with the master's degree to run the inside of a library to save a little extra money. Not to say that these media specialists aren't doing a bang-up job with the limited resources and limited time and limited energy they're getting, but the continued thought of library work being less than, when, if anything, they make it so all the other work can be more than, is, continues to blow my mind, especially, as somebody like me who is a fiscal conservative and doesn't want to spend money on anything. So
Jeff, we're talking about books. You got any favorite books you want to mention real quick?
I am patiently waiting for the third book in the Name of the Wind series. I don't think it's ever going to come. I've been reading a lot of horror as of late, and I am really shout out to Paul Tremblay's books. He's a Boston area native. He just had The Cabin at the End of the World is the book that they just made a movie out of, starring Dave Bautista and the guy who played Ron Weasley in the Harry Potter movies. That was really awesome. So I would say, yeah, shout out to Paul Tremblay.
Yeah, I'm a big comic book guy, and amazing how many comic books they have in libraries nowadays. That's one of the main things I use libraries for, to be honest, is not microfilm, although I spent quite a few hours looking at it. I spent probably more reading comic books I got out of the library. And I remember, like, when I was in high school, I discovered they have comic books in the library. I think I didn't have a very big comic book collection, but mine was probably bigger than the library's. And now it's like, there's like walls of comics in my local library. And it's like just incredible, that libraries recognize that these things are valuable and that they are, their art, their literature, that people, they're not just, some like thing that a kid reads and then throws away. They're actually literature that really deserve a place on a library shelf. But we're talking about favorite books. I will pick something a little more highbrow really quick. It's been a long time since I read this book. I think I've only read it once, and it was back when I was in college. It was not for a class or anything. I think I actually might have got it in one of those library sales where they give you a bag and you just like fill the bag, and that's how many books you get to take home. But Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, classic book. This is a book about probably the greatest Bostonian who ever lived, maybe one of the greatest Americans who ever lived, Frederick Douglass, who...
A lot of people are talking about him.
Yeah, they say
a lot of people are talking
Donald
about
Trump says he's still alive.
Getting
right?
famous.
So Frederick Douglass, hopefully you are familiar, but if you're not, he was born into slavery in the South, and he escaped and became probably one of the most well-known, at least today, well-known abolitionists. He wrote prodigiously.
He spoke prodigiously.
Yes. Brilliant guy.
Shout out to my hometown. I will give a cheap plug. The Millbury Historical Society is having a Frederick Douglass impersonator interpreter coming up in a couple weeks. So come on down to the Asa Waters Mansion, 6 p.m.
Well, I just want to say this book is very apropos for this discussion because Frederick Douglass was born into slavery, and it is illegal in, I think, most states, if not all states with slavery, to teach a slave to learn to read and write. But he talks in this book, he had a mistress who she started teaching him, like the alphabet and some like simple 3 or 4 letter words. And then his master, the person who, ostensibly owns him, catches her doing this. And he's like, if you teach a slave to learn to read and write, it's going to make him unfit to be a slave. And so, little Frederick Douglass is like, oh, well, if that's the case, I better learn to read and write because, I don't want to be a slave. And it's a great book. He goes on to talk about teaching other slaves to read and write in secret. And before he finally escapes, and it's just it's a short book. Like my copy right here is like 120 pages. It's a short book, but it's a great story just about both the value of freedom and the value of literacy and knowledge and how all that stuff is related. And it's also a true story about part of our country's history that people should be aware of. And I think it's a perfect book if you want to read a quick, not, I wouldn't say easy because it's there's some nasty stuff that goes on in that book, but it's a quick read and it's a great book, and it would be a good book to pick up for Banned Books Week and read through.
And it's a very readable book too. It doesn't feel, I mean, it's old, but it doesn't feel old and stuffy like you might expect.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of written in that style that people wrote at the time, but it's not like written.
It's not impenetrable.
Exactly. It's not one of those like books from the 1800s where you're like, whoa, are they speaking the same language?
To your point about to poorly paraphrase Mr. Douglass, that being able to read and write makes you unqualified or unable to be a slave. It kind of really brings home in a very raw way how much these sorts of efforts end up being ways to control information and ways to keep people from understanding the world around them. And, you can root these messages back to the Comstock Act in the 1800s, where they could have said anything. It was kind of like the early obscenity, we'll know it when we see it type thing, where you could just ban the transport of stuff if it was deemed inappropriate. But what I found interesting is that there is a simple case about school libraries. Shorthand is Island Trees, which was the Island Trees School District. And the takeaway quote from that one that really got to me: local school boards may not remove books from school libraries simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books. That is as clear and concise a statement as possible. And yet, what have we seen the last 2 or 3 years? We're seeing a lot of attempts to take what they call diverse books about, the Black experience, about, critical race theory, which is whatever they decide to define it as in a given week, anything that has to do with LGBTQ audiences, all sorts of stuff. All of it is simply because they dislike the ideas that are contained in those books. And in a lot of cases, they're getting away with it. And it's a shame. It's a real shame. There's been a lot of question as to like how this is getting organized. So I want to kind of give a little bit of background on it. For one, there's a group that's somewhat national called Moms for Liberty. You've probably heard of them if you're listening to this podcast. But essentially, they have developed a lot of resources to help parents who are kind of upset with the trends in schools and libraries right now.
Let's call it aggrieved.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, to put that forward. And even though, like, they are behind a lot of it, they're not behind all of it, but their playbook is what a lot of people are using. And you find very quickly, I've forgotten about 60 to 70 of the responses back in my public records request so far. And you're seeing the same notes being hit all the time. We have to protect our children. It's not okay for child of X age to be exposed to this sort of thing. It's pornography and you're grooming the children. That one is the killer that's really been the one that's levied across the way. Millbury had 4 books stolen from its library. And I had started a sort of campaign to get them back in that library along with every other library in the state. It was wildly successful, if I can toot my own horn on it. But it also came with it, I got Turtle Boy on my ass. That was a lot of fun. I was fielding death threats for months. That was a good time. You couldn't go through my Twitter mentions without somebody calling me a groomer or a pedophile. Somebody actually yelled pedophile at my house a few months ago. That was fun.
Yeah, for people who, bless your heart, if you're not familiar, Turtle Boy is this, I'm not even going to say his real name. He's just this loser.
He's a blogger.
I think he's from Worcester, who writes this blog where it's basically, he harasses people for money,
Yeah. It's a broadside. He's a broadside con artist, and that's fine.
Don't even look up his website. He's a loser.
Just look up the statue that he's named after and get a nice chuckle out of the statue. But, leave him be. But, this is where actually I think Andrew and I first intersected. Yes. Was this grooming / pornography thing.
Yeah, can we just take a second to acknowledge how disgusting it is to accuse teachers, sex ed teachers, librarians of literally pedophilia. It's just
the
vile.
Worst.
Absolutely
worst
vile.
Crime you can possibly commit. The one that most prisoners go, hey, that guy's a little off. The serial killer's like, at least I didn't do that.
Yeah, just absolutely vile to be accusing people of this sort of thing. Just what is wrong with these people to be throwing around accusations like that? And I mean, it's been levied at me too because of writing about this sort of stuff, about people mad about library books. Just on Twitter, people are like, okay, groomer. It's to throw around that so casually is just, I don't even know what to say. Just what is wrong with you? Just don't. Maybe don't do that.
For all the things that Donald Trump introduced into our political lexicon, not to diminish all the really ridiculous things he did, the complete abandonment of anything that resembles civility in the public discourse is probably one of the defining features of his era. And it's way too bad because you combine Donald Trump not caring in the world what anybody thinks of him and saying all sorts of vile things, and then all of us getting locked away in our house for a year and a half during COVID and going feral. And, it's the perfect storm of nonsense. And, when it gets to the point where people who see a book on a bookshelf that they don't like assume it's pornography because it has a sex scene in it, in the same building that they were reading 50 Shades of Grey in 5 years ago. It's insane.
Yeah, and it's not just because they have sexual content for the most part. It's because
Right.
they have LGBTQ, there, I can say it, content in it. It's, like, it's funny because, like, my library has, on DVD, Blu-ray, they've got Game of Thrones, which is like, there's like people having sex with prostitutes like every 5 minutes in that show. And you don't hear anybody complaining about it because that was like a popular show, that straight normal people enjoy. But then
Game
you
of
have
Thrones literally introduced the term sex position into
yeah.
the popular lexicon.
Yeah, and I mean not just Game of Thrones, plenty of other stuff that nobody ever raises an eyebrow about. I mean, they have a romance section in every library, which, like, the romance section, like, not that I am, a romance guy, but it's literally just these books that, the whole point of it is to, like, get to the part where they have sex. And, like, it's like, this is just, like, sex is part of literature because sex is part of the human experience. And, but nobody's questioning that. But suddenly, when it involves somebody who's like gay or bisexual or transgender or non-binary, whatever, if it's not, some straight couple, it's, this is grooming. This is, these people must be pedophiles. Like, what? It doesn't make it's just a clear case of people who are trying to cover their bigotry up by pretending, think of the children. It's all a show. They're putting on a show, trying to rile people up and use, pedophilia, as we said, probably the most despicable crime, to as cover for their bigotry. And it's gross that people would do that. And the sort of one of the, it's been called by the American Library Association, I think, for the past few years, the most challenged book. It's called Genderqueer, a Memoir by Maya Kobabe. And this, I think, is actually how Jeff and I at the very initially came into contact with one another, because this book, it's a comic book memoir by a non-binary person, and it's sort of just like a coming of age story. It's about this person's experience, how they came to identify as non-binary, and sort of some of the experiences that might be kind of unique to that story. And I saw an interview with the author who said basically that this book is really valuable because there aren't that many books by people who've actually been through this kind of experience. And for someone who's, young, who's questioning their gender identity or sexuality, to be able to look at someone else's experience and sort of say, okay, this isn't abnormal. This is, just part of the human experience. And there are other people like that. It's really helpful to people, or it can be helpful to people who you have a sibling or a parent or a son or a daughter who are going through this experience. And you can say, okay, well, I could kind of empathize with this more because I've seen this experience with someone else and I see what they're going through. And this book has been challenged because ostensibly because there's, inappropriate content in it, and there is some sexual content. Sort of the most famous, infamous, whatever you want to call it, scene involves the author wearing a strap-on dildo while, I believe it's their girlfriend, is performing like simulated oral sex on the dildo. And this scene, has caused all these conservatives to be like, oh my God, it's inappropriate. I guess let me jump back and say that, so the reason I actually read this book is not because I'm, checking out memoirs by LGBTQ people.
Although it is a brilliant book.
It is a good book.
Devastatingly beautiful book. You should read it anyway.
Yes, you should read it. But the reason I actually first heard about it, and the reason I actually, didn't just file it away somewhere in the back of my brain, and I actually went out, got a copy from the library and read it, was because last year, the Republicans, their candidate for Secretary of the Commonwealth, was a woman named Rayla Campbell. And the reason I was following this is because the Secretary of the Commonwealth, a completely unrelated reason, the Secretary of the Commonwealth is responsible for the public records appeals that Jeff and I love to complain about all the time. And so I was, following the election, and I was mainly, originally anyway, I was mainly interested in the primary because that's, in blue Massachusetts, that's where the action is, But I found out that the person running for the Republican spot was this woman, Rayla Campbell. And I just kind of started looking into her and found out that she was kind of this like far right provocateur who already had a bit of a reputation from a previous election when she ran for the federal House of Representatives, where, let's not get into that, but she sort of made, it's really silly that she made this basically the centerpiece of her campaign as Secretary of the Commonwealth was like complaining about sex ed, complaining about supposedly inappropriate library books, which basically genderqueer was 99% of what she talked about. And it's really silly because the Secretary of the Commonwealth has nothing to do with library books. I think she actually, this is like confirmed, she's basically was confused. So the Secretary of the Commonwealth is on the board of trustees for the state library. And I was at the State House today, and I popped into the state library. You can go check it out.
As one does.
Yes, of course, as one does. And like literally, they've got like, the Journal of the Massachusetts House of Representatives, it's like copies of all the old bills that were submitted. They've got, copies of like legislative history. It's all stuff like that. It's like state documents that they keep archived for nerds like me to go check out if we're doing research. Has absolutely nothing to do with what is in your local library. It's like literally 100% unrelated. The state library board is not your local library's board.
Just for the clarity, because the structure of it seems really weird, the trustees that Andrew is talking about are really agents of the government. They are kind of like the record keepers of government stuff. Your local library gets their funding and gets their support through the Massachusetts Board of Library something.
It's the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners.
They are a separate entity that the Secretary of State does not get involved with at all.
Exactly.
So,
but I found
which is
out,
the important part, that she was running for an office that didn't exist.
Yeah, but I found out from Facebook comments that she actually seemed to think that the state library like had some control over.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Like, do you imagine running for an office and like you are like literally confused about what the purpose of the office is?
Imagine if she won and she walks into the Secretary of State's office like, all right, let's get these books banned.
Yeah, and her staff is just like, what? we can't do that. That's not a thing. But yeah, so anyway, she would complain about this book, Genderqueer, all the time. At one point, she actually showed up at the Hallbrook Public Library. They had a Pride Month event outside where they had what's known as Drag Queen Story Hour. So Drag Queen Story Hour is when a drag queen, which is just a guy, for the record, it's literally just a guy with some women's clothing, maybe a wig, some makeup, who is trying to look feminine. And, there's nothing inherently sexual about it, but they've created this thing called Drag Queen Story Hour, where drag queens will go to libraries or wherever, bookstores. They will read children's books to children. And yes, they are children's books. They're not pornography like Rayla Campbell or other people are claiming. And I know what books were read at this Drag Queen Story Hour. They were literally just children's books. The names of them are in the story I wrote. And so Rayla Campbell showed up with some other, far-right provocateur people, and she's screaming, are taxpayer dollars going to this? She's screaming, has this person been Corey checked? Like, because she's trying to insinuate that this person is a pedophile. And the organizers of this place had to call the police, who had to basically tell her, look, you're causing a disturbance, that nothing illegal is happening, you need to, leave. And, eventually she left. But just This is while she's campaigning to be the Secretary of the Commonwealth, who I just want people to know, if the governor and the lieutenant governor, if they're in a bad car crash or plane crash together, Secretary of the Commonwealth is your new governor. I mean, Bill Galvin, our 30-year or so Secretary of the Commonwealth, he has been acting governor quite a few times. So this is the office that she was running for while she was outside libraries screaming and disrupting literally events for children. And so the other, I wrote a few stories about her, but my favorite one is it involves the book Genderqueer that we were talking about. So many pieces of irony to this that I can't even get into all of them. But she's at a Back the Blue event, right? Back the Blue, there to support the cops.
Intersectionality, man.
Yes. And there are counter protesters who are there to protest the far right people who tend to show up to these Back the Blue things. I think they knew that she was going to be there. And so she's showing this book Genderqueer off to these people, most of whom I don't think have ever seen the book, and they don't have any context for this. And she's showing them that picture I was talking about with the dildo. And she's saying that, this is obscene, this is pornographic, this is in libraries. And so I talked to this woman. She didn't want her name used. I called her Anna in the story. And her husband, who I didn't use his name, he's called Benjamin in the story. Benjamin says to his fiancée, Anna, she's called that book child pornography before. We should go report her to the police. So Anna goes to the police and is she's showing this book off. I think it has kids performing oral sex, which I just want to remind people.
It does not.
They're consenting adults, and it's not, I mean, I guess how you define sex is up to you, but it's not an actual...
It's Bill Clinton-esque sex.
It's not actual genitalia. There's no technically there's no actual nudity in these drawings. But in any case, she goes up to this cop and is she's showing this off. She's saying it's obscene. She's saying it's pornographic. And so the cop talks to her, and there was video of it. The cop, I think she must have put the book away, because they go to her car, or what I assume is her car. And, she takes the book out and is showing it to this police officer, and he's taking notes, and he writes a report. And in his report, he's I opened the book up, and in the first page, it says that the author is 24 at the time the story is taking place. So it did not involve children. And also, it was a drawing, so it's not child pornography. But I absolutely love this story. I think it got posted in that Reddit, leopards ate my face.
Yes.
And where it got tons of upvotes. Brilliant irony. She's going around saying this is child pornography. She's at a rally to support the police. And suddenly she's got to explain to a police officer, oh, actually, this is not child pornography. Please don't arrest me while I'm running for office for possessing child pornography, which, and I can't believe it. Okay, I want to know what is going on in her brain, because if you actually think it's child pornography, why do you have it? Why are you showing it to people? Because even if you're you think you're doing it for a good reason, maybe don't carry around and display child pornography in public, because that's gross and illegal and depraved. And why? Just why? What? I can't understand the thought. It's just what the hell is going on in her brain? I mean, is it that she doesn't believe what she's saying? Which I don't understand, because if you're trying to be a political opportunist in Massachusetts, that's not the route you go, not attacking libraries and teachers and saying that they're all pedophiles and stuff. But if you actually believe it, how do you make sense of that?
So I think I can actually answer this, which is scary in itself. But, for one, the conservatives in this state got very emboldened after Scott Brown won. That was a watershed moment for the conservative movement, for whatever it means in the state of Massachusetts. It made them think that they were a lot more of them and a lot more popular than they actually were. And they thought that Scott Brown ran as a much more conservative person than he actually is. There's a reason why he was replaced by Elizabeth Warren, to put it mildly. but it's funny because the people who were responsible for stealing the books out of Milbury, I didn't realize it at the time, but I actually did a interview with them for my column when I was freelancing for the Milbury Sutton Chronicle. And there are a lot of, what's the word? It's cognitive distortions. They have to make a lot of connections that aren't there and ignore a lot of stuff to get to the point that they're at. Their position is not coherent, but they don't know it. And they don't understand that it's not coherent. They just see, in this case here of genderqueer, they see a blowjob on page 70 whatever and assume that it's pornography and they assume it's child pornography because it is considered a YA book, a young adult book, and it's a drawing. Now, it's not even a real penis. It's a strap-on. It's with adults, but it's meant for teenagers, older teens, almost adult teens in a sense. None of what they believe is actually true, but they believe it with their heart of hearts. And they know that they're just doing it for the kids because obviously when they were kids, comics were always for kids. That was not true then. It is not true now, but that's what they think. The comics they read were for kids.
I'm 35 and my entire life comics have primarily, in that entire span, have primarily been for like older teens and adults.
So you're 35. That means you were born in 86, 87?
88.
88. Watchmen came out in 86, right?
Something like that. Yeah, I think so.
And Dr. Manhattan's hanging dong for a lot of that. It's like, that is in your, they don't shy away from it there. You know?
I mean, 80s was like, Frank Miller was, one of the most popular comic book artists, and he's just all like, literally his bag of tricks is like sex and violence,
Seriously.
So, and, just to like touch on a few more of the points you're saying, Rayla Campbell was literally going around and saying that this book Genderqueer was in not like a young adult section, but the children's section. She was specifically using that word, children's section of libraries. And when I was reporting on her, anytime she mentioned a specific library, I would check that library. And in almost every case, not only was the book not in the children's section, but the children's section was not even on the same floor as the section that had this book in it. And in fact, in one of her videos, she was in like the teen room of a library. She would post these Facebook Live videos from libraries. She posted this video where she's in the teen room. She's like, look, they've got this book here. And then she's like, oh, by the way, let's go check out the children's section on a different floor. And it's like, again, it's like, what's going on in her brain where you're saying this is like for children, but you're literally saying in your own video, I've got to go to a different floor to get to the children's section where they keep all the children's books. It just like, it boggles my mind. And I mean, Jeff, you're talking about filing like 400 public records requests. One of the crazy things I did was when I was writing about her, I literally went to all the library catalogs for Massachusetts and I went through genderqueer, like every entry. And I'm like, can I find a single children's section that has this book? I could not. I think the only one I found was like, there was a university library and I called them up and they're like, oh, well, we call it the children's section, but it's children and young adult books. And it's not for actual children. It's for like students, teachers who are researching like books for might be appropriate or for students. And it's called the children's section, but it's not like literally a children's section in the normal sense of the word. It's young adult and children, commingled. But I could not find a single children's section that had this book. But also, you're talking about stealing library books. I'm not technically saying that Rayla Campbell stole this book because I can't 100% verify that. But let's just say I found out that the copy of Genderqueer she was showing off at this rally because the police officer who wrote his report was helpful enough to put in his report that this was a Brockton Public Library book. Again, being crazy and, following up on too many things, I called the Brockton Public Library and I found out while I was working on this story that, oh, what do you know? The book was reported missing. And I actually called them earlier today and it is still missing. And I was told back when I worked on the story that the book was checked out. I don't know by whom it was checked out because libraries won't give out that information. So again, I'm
I'll just
not.
interject. No, I just wanted to interject and say that the law it's a state law that says that patron records for
Right.
books that are checked out and stuff like that is not to be disclosed to the public.
Right.
So this is a very hard line rule. And, it's not something that anybody, even with a lot of public records requests, is ever going to penetrate.
Right. So I don't know who checked out the book. So I'm not saying Rayla Campbell is the one who stole the book. All I'm saying is she had the book and it's missing. And what I do know is it was checked out at some point last year. It was due back June 15th, but it was flagged as lost on July 30th. And so it's still missing more than a year later. And I wonder if, just, spitballing, maybe Rayla Campbell still has it if the library is trying to locate it. Maybe they want to give her a call.
So it's funny because obviously I wasn't able to get the patron records of the people in Millbury who stole the 4 books. However, the person who stole the books in all of their big brain activity sent out an email to the library director saying, I took these books out and I'm not bringing them back. So effectively just doing their crimes in public. And the only reason the Millbury Library got the books back from this person was because I was petitioning the Board of Trustees at that point to invoke a very rarely used law within the thing that allows a Board of Trustees to levy $500 fines per book for books that are deliberately not brought back to the library. So this person was going to be on the hook for $2,000 worth of fines. In Millbury, a town with no library late fees.
Jeff, you're bringing down the iron fist of the public library on these people, the oppressive public library that's going to charge you $500 for a book.
Seriously.
So we'll just say, I bring up this Rayla Campbell stuff, even though it happened last year, just because, I think people should know, I guess, that Rayla Campbell never had a real chance of being our Secretary of the Commonwealth. I mean, she didn't even know what the job entailed, seemingly. But people like this, they've gained an actual foothold in other states. But people should just be aware in Massachusetts, the right-wing people in Massachusetts are not any less out there than these other people. They just don't have political power. So right. Those people are out here in our state. They are organizing, maybe not effectively, but they are still showing up to libraries to harass people at Pride Month events and doing this kind of stuff. And it's disgusting. And it goes on in our state. And you should just be aware that it's going on. I don't know that there's a ton of stuff you can do about it, but, maybe say a few kind words to a local librarian, give them some support for what they're doing, let them know that they are appreciated.
I would disagree with you that there's nothing you could do.
Okay.
Because the most I'm going to take a very wild swing at this here, that in most of your towns, your Board of Library Trustees is an elected position and gets zero information whatsoever, gets zero coverage, gets zero people. Sometimes they have to, look under the proverbial bed cushions to find somebody who will run for those positions. What is going to happen if people who don't care about freedom of information and people who don't care about this sort of thing don't run for these offices? The crazies will. And the crazies will win by default. If Rayla Campbell ran for her library trustee position in the town she lives in, he probably would have won.
Jeff, don't give her any ideas.
I know, right? I know. It was one of those things where I almost, I jumped off.
She's listening to our podcast, right?
I'm sure she is. Yes, absolutely. We ended up having a write-in candidate in Millbury. Thank goodness she's not one of them, but we didn't know who she was. She came out of nowhere. And now she's a trustee of the library. That could happen a lot. That could happen in your town. Not to put the fear of God in you, but that could happen in your town. It's not insane to think that a person who does not value what libraries offer could, in fact, try to run your local library.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
scary thought. And Jeff, talking about Rayla Campbell listening to our podcast, I'm getting flashbacks of I spent, I don't know how I would describe it. Let's just say far too many hours listening to her radio show because she had a radio show. But so Jeff, let's we were talking at the top of the show. You've got this new
Yeah.
project going. Let's get into that. We probably should have gotten into it earlier, but
Yeah. Yes. Please go to my website. No, I'm joking.
yeah, masstransparency.org.
Yes. So like I was saying at the top, the reporting on this has been lackluster. And that's no fault of any journalist, no fault of anybody in particular. It's just that nobody is really doing the legwork to find out exactly how much of a problem this is locally. The American Library Association, the ALA, they have done some surveying, and they have found, I believe they said 40 something challenges in Massachusetts, which on their site says it's the third highest in the nation behind, nope, sorry, which they say is the fourth highest in the nation behind Florida and Texas, notably. That seemed low to me. It seemed very low to me. The Massachusetts Library Association had done some work. They had a higher number, but they did it through self-reporting through their, what they call their ERIS survey that goes out to the libraries every year and is what helps them qualify for state aid. So they have some data there, but the MLA and the school library associations don't want to share that information publicly and don't have to because they're not state agencies in that sense. So I got fed up and I decided to go straight to the source. So I started requesting stuff to all the towns. I already had all the records holders from my post-commission work. So it was a lot easier than last time to blast out emails asking for any challenges that went to the library, any challenges that went to the schools. And if anybody had issued a challenge to, say, your town administrator or your board of selectmen or something like that, just to see what happens, just to see what we get. I learned a lot already, and I'm only 5 business days in, so there's still a whole week of stuff left to come in. But I've gotten probably 100 responses back, and a lot of towns have not experienced this, which is good. That's a good problem to have, that I don't have anything to report. But what is telling is the schools and the libraries that do have challenges that have already shared stuff with me. Unsurprisingly, Massachusetts is running in the same trends as the rest of the nation in terms of where the bulk of these sit. It's your genderqueers, it's your LGBTQ content, it's your diverse books. A lot of complaints about the general displays, that there are too many gay books was one quoted thing. Complaints about Black History Month, which is something we celebrated without much of a hassle for my entire lifetime. Suddenly it's a big problem.
I don't know about that, Jeff. I think some people have not been happy about it, but
this is true, but not to the point where they're actually complaining to libraries about it. That's where I'm coming from on it. But you also, when it comes to these, find some really interesting and funny ones. An interesting one is that one woman has made it her own personal crusade in Western Massachusetts to get a specific American Girl book removed because of its historical inaccuracy regarding the American Indian experience. I love that. I think that's great. I think that, for as against banning books as I am, books that are inaccurate probably don't have a place in the library. With that said, there was a very heated exchange about the real Dr. Fauci by somebody who is aligned with RFK Jr., so that you can only imagine where that goes. But an early favorite of mine, the person who really wants the Springfield Library to remove Magic Mike's Last Dance, the third in the storied trilogy of the Magic Mike Channing Tatum movies. He considers that pornography. He thought it was just a movie about dancing, folks, but it's about so much more. And the best line, I just got to recite the best line here. He complains about the gyrating, spells gyrating wrong, and then in parentheses, right afterward, humping. So maybe the title of this one should just be parentheses humping, sort of like Taylor's version, but Mike's version.
So the first two Magic Mike movies were fine.
Apparently, Magic Mike XXL is pretty suggestive, but Magic Mike's Last Dance, I mean, that was a curveball right there. You just thought it was gonna be.
Do you think this guy took like all three movies out of the library, like watched them, and then got to the third one and is like, I enjoyed the first two, but this was too much for me?
He very clearly didn't. He very clearly, he makes it very clear in his challenge that he was looking for a nice movie to watch with his wife about dancing. And, Magic Mike on the cover, he's mostly clothed in it. So.
Well, maybe it would be a nice movie for his wife to watch. Maybe he didn't like it, though.
I will note that she didn't make the complaint.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Oy.
So, have you seen many challenges to genderqueer in those?
That is probably the most significant one, and you can tell they haven't read it. You can tell just from that. That's where I come from with the script that I talked about earlier, because they're not coming at this from I've read this book and I have a problem with it perspective. It is almost the same language across the way. There's one school that sent me the sex ed opt-out forms that they were getting, which that's a whole other topic we can probably talk about at some point in the future. But they actually used a form letter that, if you Google some of the words in it, there's only one site for these words, and it's from the Massachusetts Family Institute or something like that. And it's like, yeah, it's a form letter. Like, I got angry when I was getting form letters from my FOIA request earlier this year. I can only imagine how these superintendents feel seeing the same opt-out letter come in 5 times from 5 different families.
Yeah, and the Massachusetts Family Institute, for people who aren't familiar, is like a far-right, like ultra-religious hate group that is like against sex ed and against gay people and trans people.
In a lot of ways, they make focus on the family sound reasonable, and that's not a compliment.
Yeah, and speaking of people not reading the book, and speaking of me spending way too much time listening to Rayla Campbell's radio show, she actually said in one of the episodes last year, when she was doing all this campaigning and complaining about genderqueer, that she had not read the book. She said, I'm only slightly paraphrasing, she said something to the effect of, I didn't read the whole book, I just saw a few pages and figured out what was going on. And it was very clear that she had not, because I remember at one point she was talking about it depicting drug misuse, when the only actual depiction of drugs in the book, the only thing she could have been talking about was the main character had been prescribed a painkiller by their doctor to help them get through anxiety and pain during I think gynecological exam. Basically, it was not drug misuse at all. The only way you would think that is if you open the book, saw a drug, and just immediately assumed, whatever the worst, that you could assume. And, maybe a good way to sort of bring this around, we were talking about Frederick Douglass and the importance of literacy. That Magic Mike guy, if he's out there listening to our podcast, maybe read the back of the DVD case before you take the thing out. Reading is important, even if you like to watch movies and you're not a big reader. Maybe read a little bit,
I mean, it does show the danger of starting a trilogy at the third book, too.
That too, yeah.
I will say, just to bring it around a little bit more, there are 2 things that are happening that are relevant to what we've been talking about today that people might want to look more into. One, a lot of boards of trustees have been adopting updated challenge requirements, one of which is some sort of evidence that you've actually read the book you're challenging. This is, it's funny when you think about it.
Give out a quiz.
But, I don't think it's a quiz as much as, not like doing the book report, but it's, to dissuade these sort of rote sort of, coordinated efforts. But more importantly, for the statewide efforts is that there is a bill currently in the Senate that has, I believe, as of this podcast recording, 7 co-sponsors.
We're talking about, just to be clear, we're talking about the state Senate,
State
right?
Senate, yes, state Senate, that would essentially ban book bans. Illinois has an identical bill that they passed, and essentially what it does is it adopts the ALA's Reading Bill of Rights as the state standard for book collections in the state. I have my own issues with the ALA.
American Library Association, right?
Correct. There might be some concerns with relying so much on a private organization, but it is better than the alternative we have right now, which says, hey, it's up to you guys. Good luck. Oh, and you'll get you some state funding too if you fill out the survey. Because that's what we got right now.
So, Jeff, in the information you've been getting back, have you found any examples of successful book challenges?
So, in terms of the stuff that is the most controversial nationally that people have heard about, no, not yet.
So no gender queers, nothing like that?
No, that stuff. And the good thing is that a lot of these responses have come in with the responses from the libraries themselves, where they are, librarians know what they're doing. They have they're bringing out freedom of information. They're bringing out regulations. They're bringing out, all the standards and practices and stuff. They are just blasting them with information because of course they are, because they're librarians. But, I laughed a little bit about the woman in Western Mass who's been pushing to remove the American Girl doll book from the libraries. She's been very successful at it because she is making an informed, understood complaint about the content of a book that isn't based on I don't like it, and more that this book is actively harmful to the communities it's portraying. This is a very different reason to push for the removal of a book. And, part of her entire argument is that if you were buying books now for this community, this book would not be on your list and it would not be recommended. It might have been appropriate. It might have been the best one that was available when you got it, but it isn't now. And there's something to be said about that.
Jeff, they're canceling Dr. Seuss. Can you believe it?
But that's a great example of some of this sort of collection management stuff. The Dr. Seuss books, they weren't removed from their publication slate because they were necessarily bad books. It's because some of the stuff in there was not what we would consider okay today.
Yeah,
and
let's not maybe not have children reading books with racist depictions of Chinese people.
Exactly. And I can get behind that. A lot of people will say, oh, they're not going after Cat in the Hat. Well, they might someday, and then we'll have that conversation. But for now, the complaints you're seeing for that are for very good reason. And when you're talking about books like Camp or books like Jay's Gay Agenda, those are not books that are handling a situation in a disrespectful way. It is not handling a situation where it's showing these populations of people and these characters as people who, should be mocked and aren't being treated respectfully.
Yeah, and I do think there's a difference between a library with or without, input from the public sort of making an informed decision to get rid of an old book that they maybe don't think is super appropriate. And we should be clear that you were calling it collection management, and it has a name because it's a normal thing that libraries do. That's not the same thing as banning a book. And we should be clear that, we're not going to complain about that. But what we are concerned about is, just again, aggrieved, we'll call them, people deciding that you shouldn't be reading this because it's got too much gay stuff in it or, whatever. And we're going to just make a ruckus until they pull the books.
And I will say that the communications I have about that book in particular, the librarians went through a lot of conversation about whether it was appropriate for them to even remove it to begin with. They put a lot of thought into whether that was what they should be doing or not, because they were that uncomfortable with removing information, even if that information might not be 100% accurate, because they don't know. And they don't always know, and they have to go by the experts who do know. And sometimes that means that, they're not going to not have a book that questions global warming because, questioning global warming, smart or not, is something that is important to the community and people. It's a real touch point in the debate over the environment and climate change and what have you. It's not the same. And just because you feel like you're in the majority when it comes to a lot of these issues of these marginalized communities doesn't mean that you get to dictate who gets to see it everywhere else.
But you still got a lot of work to do on this project. And I think we're probably gonna have to do a follow-up about it at some point. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like as it stands, people have been getting it is fascinating how quickly people will respond to a public records request when they want the records to be public.
Yeah.
Because this is not me, negotiating terms with police departments. This is librarians who already have all the stuff lined up and are just shooting it right out to me. My inbox is a mess right now, and I just have so many things to sort through. But, I'll probably have a lot of this stuff in the next couple of weeks up on my site. I'll have some more information on it. You can actually track my progress through the site right now. You can go on the spreadsheet. It's on a different tab from the post-commission reports, so you can see where I'm at. And if you want to help clean some data up, let me know. So yeah, hop on masstransparency.org. You can see my progress. You can read some of the funny responses I've received. And, I am also keeping track, just so everybody's aware, of what books are being challenged. So you can keep going right on the spreadsheet and see all the books in alphabetical order. And, you might find one that you don't expect, and you can look it up from there.
Yeah, and keep checking back because Jeff's going to be adding more stuff. And so also you want to check out that bill Jeff mentioned. We'll throw up a link to it, but if you want to look it up yourself, it's HD 4443 and SD 2679. You can take a look at that, make a decision about whether you think it's a good idea, maybe contact your state legislator, maybe give them some input. And I think we're probably about ready to wrap this one up. Just last thing I'll say, read a book.
Books are fun.
Books are great. Whether you're like me, I read a lot of nonfiction, and then I read comic books because if I'm reading something fictional, I love to have that visual component to it. You don't have to be like me. You can read some novels, read some short stories, maybe read Luke O'Neill's book that we talked about in a previous episode. He's got a great short story book.
Libraries have movies, so if you want the entire Magic Mike trilogy, you can just request it.
It's true. Or you could go to your local library like me and say, hey, can you guys pull out the microfilm from this month in the 80s and show me where your microfilm machine is? And by the way, I'm crossing my fingers hoping you have one of the new microfilm machines. It's like hooked up to a computer and I'm not using one of the old ones. And, or maybe don't do that because... microfilm sucks. Computers are great, but so are books. So are books.
And on that note,
read a book. We're out. You've been listening to Lights Out Mass. I'm Andrew Quemere. I write the Mass Dump newsletter. That's andrewqmr.substack.com. That's where you can find this podcast. You can also find us on Apple and Spotify.
And I'm Jeff Raymond with the Mass Transparency Project and Raymondville Tribune. masstransparency.org, raymondvilletribune.com, or at Twitter, Jeff and Milbury.
Our theme music is Sunbleach by Lifeformed. You can find more music at Bandcamp. Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
So I went to Catholic school, and I was reading books well beyond where I needed to be, from other classmates. So I went to
smart guy.
I know, right? So I went to the librarian, who was a nun, and was like, I'm in first grade or second grade, and I'm like, I need a book that's a chapter book. And she's like, oh, people really like this one, and she hands me Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. I did not know a lot of what was going on in that book. I didn't really understand it. It's not really meant for me. But at one point, I go to my mother and I go, hey, what's a period? And she just drops a plate on the floor. So she had to have a talk with the nun about, give him the books that he wants to read, but, kind of use your head a little bit.
Couldn't she have just said it's the thing you put at the end of a sentence?
Yeah, right.